A logic model is a tool for planning, describing, managing, communicating, evaluating a program, a policy, initiative, intervention, a business plan. It is a tool to assess the relationships between the program's resources, activities, and its intended consequences. Here's an example of a typical logic model framework. From the left to the right are the inputs, sometimes they're called resources, activities, outputs, outcomes. And in some cases, the outcomes are listed as short-term, intermediate, and long-term. As you describe your logic model in this graphical way, you need to also identify the assumptions you're making and the contextual factors that are influencing these different components of the logic model. So let's dive into each of these elements. Inputs, often are called resources, go into the program or intervention. It's what we invest. They include financial, personal, any resources from any sources, such as funding sources for your program, grants, donation, your partners, your staff time, technical assistant, outsourcing. The activities are events undertaken by the program or partners to produce the desired outcome, what we do. You have to clearly identify what are the early activities and the later activities. This could be described as the process of these activities. Will you be creating a state-level partnership? Will you be developing a training program for clinicians, public health professionals? If so, what are the different steps in order to produce the activities? The outputs are the direct, tangible results of activities, what we get as a result of the activities that are undertaken that are supported by the inputs, such as the resources. The outputs can be early work products, such as documentation of the progress. So let's go back to the example we had. For example, if the activities were to create a state-level partnership, the output would be, was a state-level partnership created? The output could be, what was the guideline provided for the healthcare professional? The other component of the logic model is outcome. Outcomes are the desired result of the program, what we achieve. Describing outcomes as short, intermediate, long-term depends on the objective, the length of the program, and your expectation of the program. Impact refers to the ultimate impact of the program. This could be achieved in a year, 5 years, or 10 years. And the assumptions are the belief we have about the program, about the intervention and the resources involved. Assumption includes the way we think about the program. It's the theory we use to develop the program and intervention. Sometimes this is called the theory of change. Assumptions are based on research, best practices, work, past experience, and even common sense. What are some examples of assumptions that we can make in our logic model? For example, the resources. Funding will be secured throughout the course of the project. That is an assumption you're making. The program, in this example, let's say the healthcare training, will be adopted and be used and implemented in a way we intended. That's an assumption. What if only 50% of the attendee adopt this way? These are example assumptions you would make in your model. Last is the contextual framework, which describes the environment in which the program exists and the external factors that can influence with and influence the program and intervention. For example, these could be implementation, any competition, the participation rate, funding, the achievement of these outcomes. Contextual frameworks are conditions over which we have little or no control that can affect the success. It is important to identify these contextual factors so that you understand whether it is factors that you can control within your program or agency, or if these are contextual frameworks that cannot be changed and that you have to work within these constraints. So how do you develop a logic model? First, you would determine the purpose of your logic model, who would use it, and what it's for. You will engage with your stakeholder, who will participate, and determine the focus of the logic model. Is this to identify the evaluation of a single intervention, a multi-year intervention, or looking at a comprehensive evaluation of the state-level program? State the focus of your logic model. Understand the circumstances of your logic model, which can help set the priority and clarify expectation. You will construct a series of linked activities and outcomes and statements using a left-to-right approach. If we have resources and inputs, we can do X, Y, and Z, and X, Y, and Z, which will result in what type of output and achieve what impact. This statement uses a left-to-right approach by connecting the different components of the logic model for you to assess whether the resources can achieve the activities and then what are the outputs that you would identify as a result of these activities to make an impact and the outcome. Logic models are not static documents. They're actually this dynamic document that is often revised based on new information, reflect new evidence, lessons learned and unlearned, and changes in the context of the resources, additional resources, or the depletion of resources, and how the activities are being achieved or not achieved, and the expectation depending upon the stakeholders. Tool number 3 is a public health infrastructure map. You will work on this tool as a team. You will submit tool number 2, the logic model, and tool number 3, a public health infrastructure map. What is a public health infrastructure map? In this activity, you have an opportunity to illustrate key aspects such as roles, relationships, relative importance or impact of major players, contributors, participants, stakeholders in a public health infrastructure. Your map can take any graphical form you choose, including one or more of the examples identified in this presentation. For example, you can actually draw a map using different symbols, or a scorecard, or a sociogram. In the map, you need to indicate the expenditures, roles, duties, influence, impact, anything that can be used for developing a scorecard of indicating these actors that play an important role in the public health system. As you are constructing your public health infrastructure map, consider where the federal health dollars are allocated among the various public health agencies of the federal government. Act as a lens to examine whether the federal public health spending is in line with our understanding of the federal public health role, or considering similar allocations of health dollars at the state and local level facilitates a better understanding of who does what, where public health resources go, and how this understand how public health systems work. This graphical depiction is also a great way for you to look at a systems perspective of public health. Identify all the players, the relationships between the different players. Review this following slides with your group as you're working on your toolkit. Here's an example of a public health infrastructure map. So you see in the circles, it's identified as a public health agency organization. In the very middle is the public health infrastructure. So this indicates the central point and all the different entities that are connected to it. Here we look at the data information system, the workforce, and the public health agency organization at a federal, state, and local level. And then what is branched out of these circle entities? For example, in the workforce, we look at maybe public health administrators, their practitioners, the community members, policymaker, anything you can add onto this map. Let's look at the public health agency. We can look at the nonprofit, public, private, and even the data information system. Funding, resource, research, technology. These are some of the important entities that are connected to the data information system. As you are constructing your public health infrastructure map, think about a location. Think about a specific city. Think about a particular unit that you want to illustrate in your public health infrastructure map. Another way to graphically draw your infrastructure map is using a rectangular pie chart or a scorecard. A rectangular pie chart is an opportunity for you to see all the important elements all at once. Whereas in the infrastructure map, what we just showed, you saw branches, circles, squares to indicate different players. To draw a rectangular pie chart, you would fill a blank sheet of paper with names of key public health infrastructure actors that you believe are most important. Put each into a box or rectangular object and make the size of the box on your paper proportional to the importance of that actor in the public health system. For example, the most important actors will be the largest boxes, and consider using the scorecard model. Consider using the scorecard model to depict the public health infrastructure and illustrate the relative importance of each item by the proportion of the scorecard. So here's an example of a scorecard indicating the epidemic. Here you see in big bold letters is TB. And then you also see malaria. Then you also see the HPV. Then you see measles, which is a smaller box. And then the smallest box here, you see SARS, influenza. So by looking at this box, this scorecard, you have an idea of the relative importance about that specific situation. And in here, we're looking at the epidemic. Take the same approach as you're looking at a public health infrastructure map. Like, who are the big players? Who are the subunits and the subgroups? The players, the partners, the community. Think about where they are in relation to each other. This is another graphical way of drawing your map. And it's up to your team to decide which of these different approaches you want to work on. Using the infrastructure map allows you to see relationships more clearly. If you're more of a visual person and you like to add fonts and different colors and look at how different relationships can be indicated by these image, maybe use the scorecard approach. And here are some other mapping ideas that you could use to graphically represent the public health infrastructure. We would love to have many different formats, tools that are developed by the different teams. This allows you to brainstorm together to decide on how you want to graphically represent the public health infrastructure. Have fun with this project, and we look forward and looking and reviewing your tools. Tools 2, which is the logic model, and tool number 3 is the public health infrastructure map.